The Sasuke retrieval arc was one of the best arcs in Naruto, and half the reason was due to the fight catalog that came from that arc, namely, each respective fight with the Sound 4 or Sound 5 with Kimimaro. And the reason those fights were so intense and memorable is because by that point in the series, we hadn't seen abilities that were that otherworldly outside of a few like Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Edo Tensei. So today, we're here to discuss how this whole Sound Village team could pair up against each respective member of the Akatsuki. Now, full disclosure, this video was requested to me a while ago, and at first I initially wrote it off as not being interesting enough, and who knows, it still might not be. But I'm sure y'all may have noticed in the thumbnail that there's a certain Uchiha in the mix here. Well, the reason is because the person that requested asked to include not only the Sound 4, but also a healthy Kimimaro, Sasuke by the end of the fight with Naruto at the final battle in part 1, and even throw in Kabuto from part 1 as well. So basically, all of Orochimaru's henchmen or guards or students or whatever you want to call them against each respective member of the Akatsuki. So the Akatsuki versus the Sound 4 or 5 or 6 or 7.
Don't ever do that again.
So to start off, let's try to figure out the proper scaling for these characters. For the Akatsuki, I don't think it's necessary. I'm pretty sure the scaling for them is pretty accepted by the community. But for the Sound team, it's a bit up in the air, at least for some. Let's start with the Sound 4. Specifically, Sakon, Ukon, Tayuya, Kidomaru, and Jirobo. So the best scaling for them is being able to beat two of Minato's elite honor guards, Gemma and Raito. Now granted, they had to all go into the respective Curse Mark 2 stages, and they still outnumber the Jonin, but still. Whether or not you think this is impressive or not depends on how strong you think Gemma and Raito were. Aside from being honor guards to the 4th Hokage, they don't really have too many feats. But Raito in specific was able to throw hands with Kakuzu for a bit, so there is something at least. Plus, with these two being Minato's elite honor guards, you could imply that they were relative to all the guards at the Kage Summit, which would make sense as every one of those guards there scale lower to Kakashi, as do Gemma and Raito. Now, if you do go by that scaling, this could put Gemma and Raito at a KCM Naruto level combatant. Now, I know that sounds iffy and like a wang, but just listen. Because we see Fu actually being able to swap hands with the KCM Naruto clone in the war arc when he was reanimated by Kabuto. Now granted, it was a filler scene, so you can take it for what it is, and it was a clone whose chakra was being divided amongst 11 other Naruto clones, so again, take it for what it is. Now, this is possibly reaching in terms of scaling because that would mean that it's saying that the Sound 4 in particular are KCM Naruto clone level combatants, and that's just not the case. I think realistically, Gemma and Raito are at best on the same level as Asuma, which is still pretty impressive that the Sound 4 were able to beat them. But then you take into account the Elite Jonin were also on a mission when they encountered the Sound 4, so they weren't all at 100%. And with Gemma even saying that he was pretty much out of chakra when they encountered him, so it might not make the Sound 4 beating them all that impressive. However, Shizune, who is a Jonin, still thought it was crazy that they were beaten, even considering them not being at 100%. Which means at worst in base, I think they're about mid to high tuning, and at best, the Sound 4 and their Curse Mark 2 stages are possibly pushing low to mid Jonin level if you really want to stretch. Now, Kimimaro scaling is a bit weird because in part 1, Kimimaro, even when he was sick, was still at the same level as Gaara, if not stronger. Now, I don't think people like hearing that, but even with all of Gaara's sand attacks and his giant sand tsunami and sand burial, Kimimaro at death's door still tanked it, and from what it looked like, didn't seem like he was too damaged a whole lot considering he was able to move freely through the bones of the Bracken Den, and even then was about to kill Gaara and leave both. Now, in regards to Gaara's scaling, I've seen people put him anywhere from high Jonin level to reaching into the low Kage level by the end of the Sasuke retrieval arc. And I can see arguments for low Kage level, so I'm not entirely saying that's wrong, but personally, I feel like that would be including Shikaku possession on top of his feats up against Kimimaro. So at worst, you could say sick Kimimaro is high Jonin level. Now, just like with Itachi, a healthy Kimimaro doesn't exist in the series. So to gauge how a healthy Kimimaro might look like, we have to take a look at his feats as an Edo. Now, there aren't too many, but we do have a couple. The main one is being able to box with a KCM Naruto clone. So off that, you could say he's a KCM Naruto clone level combatant. But there are a couple of counters that you can make to that. One, obviously it was a clone, so it had its chakra dispersed amongst 11 other Narutos. Two, Kimimaro also had Edo Samurai plus Lady Chiyo was there fighting with them, but there are counter arguments to those counter arguments. One, you could at least say he was fighting relative to Lady Chiyo, who was able to fight against Hanzo a handful of times. And two, unless I'm mistaken, each division in the Allied Shinobi forces had a sealing unit amongst them. So with that, you could say that Kimimaro was able to hold off that Naruto clone long enough and not take enough damage in order for the sealing unit to seal him. There's also an implication you can make when it comes to how Kimimaro was the ideal vessel for Orochimaru before he was plagued with sickness and before Orochimaru chose Sasuke instead. So from that, you could at least make a case for a healthy Kimimaro having the potential to scale somewhere around or just below beginning of Shippuden Sasuke, which is definitely anywhere from mid to high Kage level. Plus, at the end of it, an alive, healthy Kimimaro would still scale just a little bit above Ao Kimimaro in terms of physical strength and durability. And just as a good point of reference, and I'll bring this up later in the video as well, there's a scene where Kabuto and Orochimaru are talking about Kimimaro, and the way that Orochimaru is talking about him, it seems like he's gassing up Kimimaro's Kekkei Genkai more than Sasuke's, which is crazy to think about. But the way he describes Kimimara's bone density or durability, it almost sounds like he can tank any kind of physical damage. And this is Orochimaru who's been in the Akatsuki before and knows most of the Akatsuki members' abilities and what they can do. Sasuke at the end of the Sasuke retrieval arc is low Jonin level, I say, likely, at least when it comes to the second stage curse mark. 2 Tomo Sharingan Sasuke in the Chunin exam has already said to be Chunin level and was able to box pretty well against the Sound 4 and when they were all in base, though it's very likely they weren't even going all out, but still. Sasuke is at this level even without his strength and physicals being enhanced by the curse mark pill / ritual burial. And on top of gaining that strength enhancement and the 3 Tomo Sharingan and then the second stage curse mark. And speaking of, Sasuke is definitely above each of the Sound 5 in the second stage, with the arguable exception being sick Kimimaro. So yeah, I'd say low Jonin level at the very least. Plus, Kakashi did still think he'd be able to stop them even when he saw the type of chakra coming from the final valley on his way there. And speaking of Kakashi, that leads me to Kabuto scaling in part 1, where he's stated by both Jiraiya and Orochimaru to be on the same level as Kakashi, and was able to box and beat a nerfed Tsunade. And the last thing I'll mention before we get into the actual meat of this video is intel. Based on from what I can tell, I think it's a good chance that the Sound team will have a good amount of intel on each Akatsuki member, aside from a couple. There's also a precedence for this too, because Kidomaru tells Neji that Orochimaru told them about the Byakugan and the Gentle Fist, which means he probably tells his subordinates the intel they need if they plan to fight certain opponents like the Leaf or the Akatsuki, because Orochimaru and Kabuto were almost expecting the possibility of having to fight some of the Akatsuki members at some point. So naturally he'll be able to fill them in on what they can do. But it's unclear on how much intel they would have and who exactly they would have intel on. Given Orochimaru's surprise at the Totsuka Blade during Itachi's fight with Sasuke, but then him knowing almost everything he needs to know about Sasori, I think it's safe to say that everyone below the big 3 is fair game. You could say the same applies to the Akatsuki members since Kabuto was once a subordinate of Sasori, but for the sake of fairness for the Sound team, since for most of these fights, they are going to be fighting an uphill battle, we'll say that they're the only ones with intel on their side. Speaking of the big 3, that's where we'll start, since they're the ones that's pretty much a given. Starting off with Obito Uchiha. Now, for clarity, this is going to be the orange mask Obito. Now, even though Obito is going to be outnumbered here, I'm not sure if any of these Sound Ninja, aside from arguably Kimimaro, would have the speed to actually land a hit on Obito. And even that's stretching it a bit. And that's the biggest problem. Because against a large crowd or not, if they can't catch him, they're all eventually going to get pulled into combo. Now, you could say because Fu and Torne did a decent job against him that all these 7 will be able to do something similar. And granted, yeah, Fu and Torne did something. But looking back at that fight, Obito never at one point seemed worried. And even then, Obito took on the Leaf team that were sent to capture Itachi, and that had way more ninja than just 2. And Obito wasn't even close to taking that fight seriously. He was just buying time. Honestly, I think the only real problem for Obito here is Tayuya's flute genjutsu, because we saw Kabuto was able to both catch Itachi and Sasuke with it at the same time, and it required both of them to use their MS to break each other out. Now, obviously, the potency of the jutsu was stronger there because it was being casted by Sage Kabuto, so it's very likely it's not going to be as strong here. And plus, maybe because of that, that's why Shikamaru was still able to have enough movement to throw a kunai before he was fully caught by it. In which case, Obito should still have enough time to warp into Kamui and warp back out and pull Tayuya in, and from there, I think it's a clean wrap. Next up is Pain. Now, again, this is pretty obvious. From the jump, if Pain wanted to, he could just use Chibaku Tensei or Chaotic Shimmer Tensei, but even if we say that because of the rest of the paths of Pain are on the field, Nagato would resort to using those, literally the animal path and the summons on its own are going to give them the most trouble. That's not even factoring in the Diva path pulling any of them in the direction of the human path or the Naraka path to kill them. At best, Sasuke and or Kimimaro could take out one other paths on their own. Best I can argue, in my opinion, is the Naraka path, since it temporarily got taken out of commission by a base for Sengoku Konohamaru, and the Predator path in case of Kimimaro, since I'm sure with how strong Kimimaro bone density is, and the Predator path isn't a combat type, that he can probably be taken out through taijutsu. Absolute best case for the Sound Team is that if they protect Tayuya long enough to catch all the passive pain, or at least the most dangerous one in their flute genjutsu, and then each of the Sound Team members can try to take them out while they're caught. Or if Kimimaro can use the bracket dance while they're caught and take them all out of commission. But with the amount of summons that Pain is going to have on the field, especially the ones like the chameleon, the bird, and the multi-headed dog, it's going to be easier said to protect Tayuya. Even more so if Pain is able to catch on quickly enough and Tayuya is taken off the field. And I don't think Tayuya can use her summons to help protect her while she's using their genjutsu, so all they would have to even remotely help defend her against the Rinnegan summons would be Kabuto summoning a couple of giant snakes like he did in the three-way deadlock fight, and Kidomaru's giant spider. Which, I mean, hey, it's better than not having them, but it's not going to be enough to hold them off for too long, like, at all. Now, I don't want to sleep on Jirobo's strength and Kidomaru's webs and Sakon's abilities, but the Rinnegan summons already give this Sound Team enough trouble. Without them, and assuming Nagato saves his panic button moves for when they get it down to the Diva path, then I think they could do a decent job. But given the speed of some of the paths, which could be just below the Raikage at worst, and with the extended field division on top of the summons and the crazy abilities of the Rinnegan, yeah, the Sound Team don't stand much of a chance here. Next up is Itachi, and if we give Kimimaro his healthy condition for this fight, we'd have to do the same thing for Itachi, but if I'm being honest, I don't think that's going to matter. Because if we go by the worst scaling for Kimimaro, who is potentially just below the beginning of Shippuden Sasuke, then this means the Sound Team's strongest fighter gets beaten. As Toby said to Sasuke, that even with Itachi being sick and near death, if he had been trying his hardest in the fight, he would have easily killed Heavy Sasuke. Now, obviously, there are more than just one opponent on the field for Itachi to beat, so let's see how he would go. Well, just like with Pain and Obito, I think the biggest problem here could be Tayuya's flute genjutsu. And on that note, since I brought it up a few times, I want to just say that keep the Tayuya's flute genjutsu in the back of your mind, because I'm going to mention something about it at the end of the video, so just wait for it. But as soon as Itachi sees Tayuya performing the genjutsu, he's more than likely going to roast her with Amaterasu. Again, if Shikamaru had enough time to throw kunai before he was fully caught, then Itachi should have enough time to use Amaterasu, especially if she's just standing there stationary. And this would likely be the same for the other Sound Four, specifically because none of them have the speed scaling to avoid Amaterasu, and even sick Itachi should have the chakra reserves to use it on all four. Then that just leaves Kimimaro, Sasuke, and Kabuto. And really, all it would take is just one Tsukuyomi for Kimimaro, and Itachi should be able to handle Sasuke and Kabuto with just tight. Even if they know and try to avoid looking in Itachi's eyes due to the prior intel, with Itachi's intelligence, I'm sure he'd find a way to take them down. Their best chance is if Itachi uses the Susanoo and Kimimaro uses the Bracken Dance. Because if Gar can use the sand to affect Madara at his feet through his Susanoo, Bones from underground should be able to do the same thing to Itachi from his Susanoo. But again, I don't think it even gets that far. Personally, I think the best thing I could say for this Sound Team is that they'd be able to beat the 30% clone of Itachi at the beginning of Shippuden. Because honestly, I think even sick Itachi takes this win, let alone healthy Itachi. Healthy Itachi takes it 100%. Now we move on to Kisame. Now Kisame is very similar to Pain, that if he wanted to from the jump, he could just summon the giant lake, fuse with Samehada, and probably just take them all down. Since I don't really think any of them have experience with fighting underwater in the first place, let alone fighting against someone who specializes in underwater combat. But if we say Kisame doesn't start the fight this way and doesn't go straight for the giant lake, how does the fight go? Well, for starters, everyone except for Kabuto might be screwed when it comes to their curse mark. Because with Samehada, it's very likely he'd be able to absorb the chakra from them while they're in the curse mark stage. Now, since the curse marks are based off senjutsu, I'm not 100% sure if absorbing the chakra from them would affect Samehada negatively. As in a similar way to how Sage Energy made the Preta path turn into a frog. If it does, then absorbing their chakra could backfire, but if it doesn't, then the Sound Team are definitely going to be in a worse position. Now, outside of that, though, the only one that could really box against Kisame with Samehada here is Kimimaro. His bone density might be able to go toe-to-toe with Kisame. However, given Kisame's feats against someone as fast as Killer B, I don't know if Kimimaro would have the capacity to keep up with Kisame. So Kimimaro definitely might need some backup. Problem with that is, we've seen a severely weaker 30% clone of Kisame use water clones and immediately trap 3 people in water prison, 2, possibly 3 of whom scale at or above each sound 4 at their top condition. So I have no doubt Kisame would be able to do the same thing, but even faster when he's at full power, which would just leave Kimimaro, Sasuke, and Kabuto. And since Kisame is around a 3 Tomo Sharingan Itachi, this means Sasuke would likely not pose much of a threat. And unless Kabuto can cut off his chakra network somehow with his medical ninjutsu, then the only one that could really do anything is Kimimaro. Now, I'm not saying Kimimaro wouldn't put up a good fight, especially with Sasuke and Kabuto as backup. But again, most of Sasuke's arsenal is going to be countered by Kisame's water style, and there's a possibility of the curse mark being ineffective with Samehada. Like, Kabuto's medical ninjutsu would have to play a serious role in this teamwork play here, because other than that, the only options are to try and corner Kisame into getting his head cut off by Chidori from Sasuke, or a bracken dance from Kimimaro. But then again, Kisame also has Samehada for regen as well if Kisame gets too damaged. And this is all without factoring the giant lake if he feels like he needs to. Now, I don't want to be too dismissive of the sound 4. Ones like Jirobo might be a tad slept on, at least when it comes to physical strength. A couple of pretty impressive feats from him are, 1, casually lifting a giant piece of the earth that's comparable in size to some of the Renegon summons that Naruto was lifting in the Pain fight, and 2, in his second stage curse mark, he was able to casually lift Choji when he was in his giant expansion jutsu. Now, I'm not saying this makes Jirobo as strong as someone like Sage Naruto or Tsunade. I'm just pointing it out that his physical strength might be low-key impressive. And I know I haven't really talked about the Earth Dome Prison, which is definitely a useful jutsu, but everyone that I've talked about so far has a way of countering it. Obito has Kamui, Pain can just use Shinra Tensei to break out, Itachi can use Susanoo to break out, and I imagine Kisame summoning the giant lake could do the same thing. And Tayuya's flute genjutsu might not be a factor here either, since Samehada is there to either funnel chakra into Kisame, or it could just bite him really hard to break him out. So yeah, all in all, I think Kisame has this. The best case I could make for the Sound team is, like with Itachi, they could probably beat 30% clone of Kisame at the beginning of Shippuden, but that's about it. Next we have Deidara, and this might actually come to a matter of speed, because let me tell you, as soon as Deidara takes flight, it's almost a guaranteed victory for him. Now, let's take a look at a fight on the ground real quick. Now, Deidara might not sound impressive when fighting on the ground at first, but let's not forget he was fighting with Team Guy for just a little bit with just a kunai and no arm. Now granted, he didn't seem too confident that he could last too long against them, because not too long after this he went straight for his fake suicide bomb, but regardless, it's still very impressive given the circumstance. If it had been him with his arms, who knows how much better he would have done. Now from that feat, it's possible to say that Deidara could take on the Sound 4 on the ground and not even have to take flight. But assuming the other 3 combined might pressure him into doing so, could they prevent him from summoning a clay figure and taking to the air? Well, considering that the fastest fighter would be Kimimaro or Sasuke, who Deidara avoided 2 blitz attempts from a severely stronger Sasuke in Shippuden, I'd say the odds of them landing a hit on Deidara in time before he gets to the air are slim. And like I said, at that point, there isn't really much they could do, because none of them are even remotely countering C4, except for arguably Sasuke if he thinks quick enough and uses Chidori on his body the same way he did in Shippuden. C3 is too big of an explosion for them all to avoid. Ones like Kimimaro with his durability, Sakon with the Rashomon Gate, Jirobo with his Earth Style, and Sasuke with his Sharingan might be able to avoid the C2 Dragon Guided Missiles for a bit, but not indefinitely. Now, something that I thought about and could potentially work in the Sound team's favor. If Deidara takes flight and only resorts to using the C2 Dragon Missiles for a time being, if Tayuya can stay out of the line of fire long enough, she might be able to cast her genjutsu on Deidara. Now, I know Deidara trained his left eye in order to see through genjutsu, so maybe there's a chance it still won't work, but being that he trained it for Itachi's genjutsu specifically, might mean he only trained it for visual genjutsu and that he's still more susceptible to being caught by auditory genjutsu. Now there's also an argument that could be made that even if one is caught by this genjutsu, that they'd be able to break out of it by doing something as simple as biting their lip, similar to how Kurenai did to break the genjutsu reflection Itachi pulled on her. But to be honest, despite Kurenai being a Jonin and the implication that she's a genjutsu specialist, I'd argue Tayuya's flute genjutsu is more potent and powerful than the genjutsu she tried to use on Itachi. Plus, if it was possible to break out by doing something as simple as that, I'm sure Shikamaru would have done so instead of resorting to just breaking his finger with a shadow, but it is also up to opinion. If they are able to get Deidara caught in the genjutsu, then it could be possible for either Sasuke or Kidomaru to use any long-range attacks to get Deidara down to the ground to where Kimimaro can finish him off. However, I think their best chance to get Deidara caught in a genjutsu is doing so before he takes flight, because if it's pulled off, Jirobo could trap Deidara in the Earth Dome and Kimimaro could use Bracken Dance to beneath Deidara to kill. But this is all without mentioning that Deidara could use some C1 clay figures to distract the Sound team long enough to summon the C2 Dragon and take flight. And again, if he drops C3 or C4 quick enough, they're pretty much done for. And now we go on to Kakuzu. Now, the fight with Kakuzu here might have a couple of factors that help decide how this will go. If we go by what I think is the most realistic scaling for Kimimaro here, then I feel like Kimimaro already gives Kakuzu a decent fight. Because I personally believe that heavy Sasuke versus Kakuzu would be more or less the same as it was when Sasuke versus Deidara. Whether or not you think Deidara is weaker or stronger than Kakuzu is irrelevant because they're definitely both in the same tier. And Deidara ended up giving Sasuke a pretty solid run for his money. Granted, Sasuke was holding back and even did say that he underestimated Deidara. But Deidara also wasn't acting as calm and composed as he was during his fight with Gaara, due to Sasuke being an Uchiha and, by extension, Itachi's brother to boot. So if Deidara had given heavy Sasuke some trouble, Kakuzu should be able to give at the beginning of Shippuden Sasuke, who didn't even have Orochimaru, absorbed an even tougher fight. And if we go by the potential beginning of Shippuden Sasuke relativity for Kimimaro, then this fight is already going to be pretty tough for both sides. Now, the second thing right off the bat is I don't know which is the stronger, Kakuzu's Diamond Morph or a hypothetical healthy Kimimaro bone density. If this was sick Kimimaro, I'd be more inclined to say Kakuzu's Diamond Morph is stronger because it does have some pretty impressive feats. The most notable of which is being able to tank a fireball from Matatabi at point blank. Now, you could say it isn't that impressive because it was A, an attack from one of the weaker tail beasts, and B, a fireball and not a Biju bomb. If it was a Biju bomb and Kakuzu still tanked it, then yeah, I'd say it's pretty busted. Now, granted, it still could be busted, and it's an attack from a freaking tail beast, so I'm not trying to downplay Matatabi at all. I'm just saying if it was an actual Biju bomb or if it had been from a stronger Biju, then the feat of Kakuzu tanking it would be even more impressive than what it is. But Kimimaru's bone density and durability is nothing to scoff at either, because even when sick, because Kimimaru's bone density tanked all of Gaara's attacks. Most notable was the giant sand burial, and then right after that, survived being buried under 200 meters below the Earth's surface. And not only did he survive, but from what it looked like, he didn't even seem really phased all that much, and even was still able to move within the Bracken dance. And as I said earlier, when he re-emerged and was about to kill Gaara, it didn't even seem like he was all that injured. So in all honesty, healthy Kimimaru's durability might be broken. Without making any hard definitive guesses, it's kind of tough to speculate because we don't really have any upper limit to how much either the Diamond Morph Jutsu or Kimimaru's bone density can withstand. At best, they're both on par with each other in terms of durability and physical strength. I think Kakuzu was overall physically stronger than Kimimaro as he was able to stop Matatabi's paw pretty easily. But again, who knows if the healthy Kimimaro might be able to do the same thing. But regardless, if we're taking this scaling for Kimimaro, then it's like I said, it's going to be a decent fight already for Kakuzu. Now, with the Sound Team having intel, they'll know about the 5 hearts and that all of them need to be destroyed in order to fully beat Kakuzu, and that they all utilize a specific chakra nature. Now, there's a possibility that Tayuya's genjutsu won't be as useful here as it would be with the other fight, because if Kakuzu is caught, his hearts might be able to do something to break him out, either by funneling chakra from outside or going back into him doing something similar to break him out of the genjutsu. Now, I will say that if Tayuya is able to get all 5 hearts plus Kakuzu himself caught at the same time, then this definitely increases their chances of winning. But considering the hearts are going to be flying around, shooting off attacks like crazy, plus Kakuzu himself from a distance, I think it'll be easier said than done getting all of them at once. And if that is the case, then the Sound Team is going to have to team up in pairs in order to take the hearts out. For example, Jirobo and Sakon could take on the Fire Style heart, Tayuya and Kidomaru can take on the Wind Style, or, whichever other one, and Sasuke and Kabuto could do the same with the Lightning Style heart. And that just leaves Kimimaro to fight Kakuzu with his Earth Style heart. Now, I will say, I think Kimimaro versus Kakuzu and the Earth Style heart is probably going to end in a stalemate. I think it's going to take one of them running out of chakra in order to take the win. So the question becomes, can the other Sound Team members take the other hearts out in time to help Kimimaro? And to be honest, I could honestly see it 50-50 because altogether they were able to press Kakashi decently, but in terms of durability, they aren't that impressive. I mean, it took one Raikiri from Kakashi to destroy one heart, and it took one stab from Hidan to destroy the other. So ones like Kabuto, Sasuke, and maybe even Jirobo could possibly have the strength needed to take out one heart each here individually. That said, the heart's attack power is nothing to sleep on either, because each jutsu that Kakuzu shot out from each individual heart was massive in scale, particularly the Wind Style and Fire Style attacks. Even Kakashi said that they were high-level ninjutsu. The Wind Style in particular was strong enough to theoretically one-shot Hidan. And Hidan even said that Kakashi was the only one to survive that 1-2 combo they ever used, implying that it's a jutsu capable of one-shotting most opponents. And that's not even factoring in if Kakuzu combines any of the hearts to increase their attack power. Speaking of, If Kakuzu goes into his transformation from the start, or if he still has 2 to 3 hearts available on the field, I think he ultimately wins. Especially if he still has the Earth style heart to use the Diamond Morph in conjunction with his transformation. Because if Tayuya can't use her genjutsu in this fight, or at least not effectively, then I personally think the Sound Team is losing 3 to 4 of its members during this battle. Specifically, the Sound 4. Like, I could see the Sound Team taking 1 or 2 of the hearts in the process, especially if they use summons like Tayuya's puppets, Kidomaru's spider, and Kabuto summoning a couple of giant snakes. But the Sound 4 specifically, I can see them getting beaten as well. So I think at best, it's going to be Kimimaro, Sasuke, and Kabuto versus Kakuzu with his Earth style heart and possibly 2 to 3 more. It really just all depends on if they can destroy Kakuzu's Earth style heart quick enough, because if they can, I actually think the Sound Team could take it. But if they can't, I think Kakuzu can hold out long enough to take them out, especially if he goes into his transformation. But doing so is going to be very difficult. Only reason that Kakashi was able to do so was because he was able to do so in a surprise assassination attack, which I'm not saying they couldn't pull that sneak attack off here either, given how smart ones like Sasuke and Kabuto are. But again, it's going to be really tough for them to do so. This fight really just depends on a few things. If the Sound Team is somehow able to destroy the Earth style heart early on, then I think the fight goes more in their favor. Which, with a quick flute genjutsu on Kakuzu himself, plus if Sasuke acts quick enough to destroy the heart with a Raikiri, it's possible. But if they don't, I don't think they can win. It just depends on how many hearts you believe the Sound Team aside from Kimimaro can take out before they get taken out. Overall, I'd say Kakuzu takes this, but depending on circumstances, the win rate could go up or down. Next up, we have Sasori. Now, like with the other fights in this video, Tayuya's genjutsu might be the biggest help here. Now, there are people amongst the Naruto community that are split between whether genjutsu itself can work on Sasori or not, since he's just a puppet. Now, there are those who will say, since his body is a puppet, that he doesn't have the senses in the conventional way a regular human would. But in the case of an auditory genjutsu, since Sasori can still hear things, then that means genjutsu should still work, possibly still affecting his heart at the core. And so I'll argue for both sides. If it can, then they might be able to catch Sasori right off the bat while he's in the Haruka shell. But if not, then the fight's going to be an uphill battle for sure. If we take this fight and say Sasori acts the same way he did against Sakura and Chio, and he starts off with, certain stages, well, the Haruka shell is going to be broken through at the start. I think that's fair. If he then uses the third Kazekage puppet, the Iron Sand could pose a problem, because Kidomaru's strongest bone attack wasn't able to fully penetrate Gaara's Shikaku's shield in part 1. So this call to say the difference between durability and strength between Gaara's sand in part 1 and the Iron Sand, and Kidomaru to help the Kimimau's bone strength, is enough to help defend against Kimimau's bone attack. But that's where the other teammates come into play. For example, Kimimaro can at least combat the third Kazekage in the Iron Sand long enough for any of the others to help. Ones like Kidomaru and Tayuya can attack from a range, and Sasuke with his Chidori and Jirobo with his strength might be able to eventually break it if Kimimaro can get into position to do so. As well as Sakon being able to possibly help defend against oncoming attacks from the Iron Sand with the Rashomon Gate, and Kabuto for any healing or even Chakra Scalpel to possibly help sever the chakra string. Now, I know the Iron Sand can change its shape and structure and all to possibly help reduce the mobility for the Sound Team, and ones like Jirobo and Sakon might be affected and might even get one shot by it, but Kidomaru and Tayuya can stay far away as possible so they might not get hit. Kimimaro might be able to tank it even if he does get hit. Kabuto might be able to avoid it if we give him the Kakashi scaling, and Sasuke might be able to do the same thing as well as with his Sharingan. So I think one way or the other, the third Kazekage will be taken down. Next is the 100 puppet. Now we know that Kimimaro is good at fighting against large crowds of enemies, such as when we saw he was able to defeat all the QB Naruto clones, which was anywhere from 100 to 200 clones. Now, I'm not saying those Naruto clones are necessarily on the same level as Sasori's puppet. After all, it did take Chio using the strongest 10 puppets that were ever created and Sakura together to beat them. But Kimimaro took out all those clones in bait while sick, and he wasn't even remotely trying. Like, looking back at that fight, it looked like he was just kind of playing around and buying time. So the only ones that would probably have trouble here are the Sound Force specifically. I'm sure Sasuke with his 3 Tomoe Sharingan would have the reaction time on par, if not above, Sakura at the time of the Sasori fight. And if we put Kabuto around Kakashi's level, then he might be okay too and cut through some of the puppets with his Chakra Scalpel. Plus, in Kimimaru's case, he can also protract his bones out of his chest and his torso outward in order to use them as both defense and offense. So for example, if some of the puppets start charging at him, it's possible they might just get broken on impact. And this is also without mentioning that Kimimaro might be able to take out some of the puppets with the Bracken Dance. So by the time they eventually deal with the 100 puppets, I can see the Sound 4 being beaten, and then it would just be the other 3 left to fight Sasori's real body. And depending on how much damage Kimimaro is taken by this point, I think it could be possible. Now, I'm going to get to something that I haven't gotten to yet, which is Sasori's poison. Now, since they will have knowledge of this going in, this will definitely help their chances of avoiding it. However, that's not to say it's a guarantee. As we see, Sasori is able to use the poisons in different ways, such as with the blades and as a cloud of smoke. Now, if any of them get cut or inhale the poison, they're done for, with the only possible exception being Kabuto. I know you could say that if they had prior knowledge, then they should be able to have an antidote for everybody, but I'm already giving them like leeway with knowledge, so giving everyone the antidote for Sasori poison I think is kind of reach. Now with the string of stages for Sasori, with the Hiroka puppet, third Kasekage, and the 100 puppet plus Sasori himself, no way is everybody avoiding the poison or avoiding getting killed at all. Someone is going to get caught and get killed. Like I said, I think at best it gets down to Kimimaro, Sasuke, and Kabuto. That's not to say that either one of them couldn't get caught and killed by the poison either. And I've seen some people make some cases for Kimimaro and say that because of his bones, he can't be cut or, draw blood, so the poison wouldn't affect him either. But we do see in the Gaara fight that Kimimaro does in fact bleed. So all it's going to take is getting a little bit of poison into the bloodstream and it's over. Or again, even inhaling it as a cloud of smoke. So I think overall, Sasori could potentially take this, but if the Sound Team are able to get it down to Sasori's real body and still have Kimimaro, Sasuke, and Kabuto to fight him, I honestly think they might be able to take. Now, real quick before I move on, I want to address a couple things. Things that y'all probably have already typed in the comments or typing in now. But first, as I said earlier, I was going to bring up Tayuya's flute genjutsu. Now, despite the fact that it seems like I'm praising the jutsu to high heaven, keep in mind, I'm giving the Sound Team a lot of leeway and assuming that the jutsu itself has a friendly fire aspect to it. Because if it doesn't, and their teammates are also affected by it, then it pretty much renders the jutsu useless, and thereby meaning that the win rate for all the previous battles is lower in the Sound Team's favor. And you might also be able to make the same case for Kimimaro Bracken Dance. Now, the second thing, and something that might flip-flop this win rate argument, is that a lot of these fights depend particularly on how you scale Kimimaro. Because I'm using what I feel is more realistic in terms of the potential he was said to have if he had been healthy. Again, which is either on par or below the beginning of Shippuden Sasuke. If you feel, however, that he scales around the KCM Naruto clone, then in all honesty, Kimimaro on his own already gives most of the Akatsuki members a hard time. Just as a point of reference, if y'all feel like I'm gassing Kimimaro up too much, keep in mind, when Orochimaru and Kabuto were talking about Kimimaro in part 1, the way Orochimaru spoke about it honestly felt more like he valued Kimimaro's Kekkei Genkai than he did Sasuke's, which, looking back kind of seems odd, but at the same time, the way he kind of gasses Kimimaro up, that he feels like Kimimaro's Kekkei Genkai is the one that stands above all. He even says verbatim in the manga that his Kekkei Genkai is able to deflect almost all physical attacks. And this is Orochimaru who has been in the Akatsuki before and knows pretty much all, if not most, of their abilities, which again could be consistent from what we see in the war arc, because again, Kimimaro was able to go toe-to-toe with the KCM Naruto clone. It's never really shown what happened to the Naruto clone, but people have often speculated whether it was Lady Chiyo that made the clone disappear or if it was Kimimaro, because it definitely wasn't any of the samurai. So either way, you could say that Kimimaro made the clone disappear, or he's fighting relative to Lady Chiyo who made the clone disappear. Regardless, he was able to at least go toe-to-toe with that KCM Naruto. So if you do go by the Kimimaro scaling in the war arc and say that he's on the level of KCM Naruto, then honestly, Kimimaro himself, again, already gives a lot of these Akatsuki members some trouble right off the bat. The others are there really just for backup. Any kind of backup they can provide is going to seriously help this kind of Kimimaro. And then the last thing I'll say before I move on is, if you think I'm gassing the Sound 4 up too much, there are a couple of things that, I don't want to use these in per se, because they were said in filler arcs or filler episodes or whatever, but I thought they were at least worth mentioning. In one scene in the filler arc where Kabuto had brought the Sound 4 back with the reanimation jutsu, I can't remember whose flashback it was, but they were talking to Orochimaru either before or after he fought Jiraiya and Tsunade during the three-way deadlock fight, and Orochimaru kind of makes a backhanded compliment or praise or whatever you want to call it, and saying that in his condition, that the four of them, if they worked together, could beat Orochimaru. Now again, it's a filler, so I'm reiterating and emphasizing, I'm aware that it's a filler statement, so take it for what it is. But if you do believe that, and if it is to be believed, that's not actually that bad, because this Orochimaru was still able to go toe-to-toe with both Jiraiya and Tsunade at the same time. Granted, all the Sannin were nerfed, but again, Orochimaru was nerfed as well, and he still took on Jiraiya and Tsunade in a stalemate. So I think that's not bad, really. And then the second thing is that Shikamaru, at some point during when they were fighting all four of them at the same time, said that even when they fought them and during when they were alive, that all the Sound 4 had the strength level of a Jonin. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that helps at all, but again, it's, you know, a statement from a filler episode. I'm not taking it as a full credit or like full canon, obviously, but just I thought it was worth mentioning. And now we go on to Konan. Now, Konan is tough and does have some pretty impressive feats. First of which is being able to fight off Shino and his dad and a couple of other Overwhelm clan members to a stalemate when Pain invaded the Leaf Village. And second, the more obvious impressive feat is her being able to go toe-to-toe with Obito and manage to damage him a good bit. Now, Obito did say he underestimated her, so at times you might be able to argue that this feat isn't too impressive, but still. Given how she was able to blow off his arm is low-key kind of crazy. Now, that said, she only barely managed to do so with getting herself damaged as well. Now, her best chance here is to kill Kimimaro, obviously. And frankly, I genuinely don't know if that kind of explosion that she had on Obito would be enough to kill Kimimaro. I could definitely see him being damaged for sure, especially considering that Obito himself is quite durable. After all, he was able to stop Suigetsu from attacking Kisame with the Executioner's Blade with just one arm. And he did it like it was the easiest thing he ever did. But if Kimimaro can't be outright killed by an explosion from Konan, setting aside the obviously 600 billion paper bomb, of course, then I don't know, because Kimimaro can also regrow new bone, and if any of the other members of the Sound team have any kind of good backup and support, Konan might not have what it takes to permanently kill Kimimaro and by extension beat this Sound. Now she can fly, which will definitely help her, but characters like Kidomaru and Tayuya can attack from a range, as well as any fire style from Sasuke. Now Konan can tank some damage herself, as she was able to tank a point-blank fireball attack from Jiraiya. So in all honesty, she might be able to tank most of what the Sound 4 and Sasuke can dish out, setting aside Chidori. But CM2 Sasuke can also fly, and I'd be willing to say that an Onyx Chidori at worst could break through Konan's defense. Plus, Kimimaro can also travel through the bracket dance, so if Konan flies just enough in range, she might get caught by either Sasuke or Kimimaro, or both. All in all, I think Konan could take out the Sound 4, like I'm willing to believe even if all 7 of these characters rush her. Sound 4 could probably be beaten, but I think she doesn't get past that. And then we go on to Hidan, and if they have intel, I don't think Hidan's going to provide too much trouble. I think Kimimaro himself already gives Hidan enough trouble as it is, and that's not even counting the other support members who can attack from a range and have decent physical strength in the terms of Jirobo, and have the Rashomon gates to defend anything really with that Hidan has. And then Sasuke with Chidori, Kabuto with his chakra scalpel and healing, and then Kimimaro with his bone density. I don't see. Now granted, if Hidan can cut Kimimaro, then honestly, that might be GG for him. Because if he attacks his heart, then I don't think there's much he can do. And maybe Kabuto can still heal him, maybe. But I'd be more willing to give it to Hidan at that point. But if they do have intel of this going in, I think they're going to be more cautious. And just for this hypothetical battle, if they don't have intel, I actually think Hidan could take it. Because if he gets Kimimaro killed, and if he doesn't play around and goes right for the heart, then honestly, I'd be more willing to give it to Hidan versus Sasuke, Kabuto, and the Sound 4. Like, maybe you could argue Sasuke and Kabuto, with how smart they are, might be able to deduce how Jashin ritual works and thereby incapacitate Hidan somehow. But I think I would probably give it to Hidan more often than not if they didn't have intel. Now, real quick, again, like I said earlier, a lot of these fights hinge on Kimimaro. Like, I think we can safely say that Kimimaro is the leader of this team, right? And if any of the Akatsuki members get Kimimaro off the field, they pretty much win. With the exception of maybe Hidan and maybe Konan, but that, again, all just depends on how you scale Kimimaro. And just for the sake of total fairness, here's what I'll say, is that if you go by the scaling of KCM Naruto for Kimimaro, then I think most of the Akatsuki actually might lose. Pain and Itachi are the only notable exceptions, but everybody else from Kisame downward gets beat. If you take Kimimaro at his beginning of Shippuden Sasuke relativity scale, then I think they might be able to beat everyone up till Kisame. Kisame is a maybe, but I think he holds the edge over them overall. So Kisame and the big three still win. Now, I will say also, if you go by the scaling for Kimimaro and you don't believe he's relative to either beginning of Shippuden Sasuke or KCM Naruto, and still say he scales to where he was when he fought Gaara in part 1, then honestly, all the Akatsuki should win. But the, again, only notable exception being Hidan. So I just want to get that out there, that depending on how you scale Kimimaro, that might determine how these fights play out. But there's the video. Hope you all did enjoy. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Let me know in the comments if you think I'm just reaching with Kimimaro and the Sound 4. I didn't really talk too much about Sasuke and Kabuto, but maybe I'm sleeping on what they could do in these fights as well. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. But like the video if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, click the bell for more notifications. Until my next one, like and snow, out.